Dorothy, tiptoeing through a curtain into an adjoining red rock cavern that served as a bedroom, undressed quickly and putting out the ruby lamps, slid thankfully between the red silk sheets and was soon as soundly asleep as Pegasus. They were just having breakfast, served by two small gnomen in their red sitting cave, when Schufenwaller came hurrying in to announce that Calico was ready and waiting to see them. Earlier, the Gnome King and his chamberlain had discussed the possible purposes of Dorothy's visit, and Calico had been extremely annoyed to learn that she wanted to borrow his army. "And you will lend it to her, all our 100,000 trained gnomon yeomen?" questioned Schufenwaller anxiously. "What else can I do?" Calico snapped his little gray eyes unhappily. "Remember, it was Dorothy who stole the former Gnome King's magic belt and really was the means of my becoming king." "That's so," muttered Schufenwaller, pulling his ear reflectively. "But why not use a little strategy in this conference, King? Why not pretend to help her and at the same time safeguard your own interests? Lending our army is a dangerous experiment. Suppose an enemy threatened us while our fighting forces were in the Emerald City. Anything could happen." "Put her off. Make excuses," urged Schufenwaller craftily. This suggestion fell in exactly with the Gnome King's wishes, and curious to know what really had brought Dorothy to his castle, he sent his little chamberlain hurrying off to bring her to the throne room. "And now for a little calicoaxing," sniffed Pegasus, waddling unconcernedly along beside Dorothy under magnificent arches, over artificial terraces and rock gardens, gazing down long vistas of yet unmined shafts where hundreds of gnomes worked busily with picks and shovels to further enrich the already enormously rich and powerful little metal monarch. Calico, as they entered the beautifully furnished and lavishly carved cave that he used for a throne room, came hurrying to meet them. "So charming of you to come all this way just to see me," murmured the Gnome King, taking both of Dorothy's hands in his own and bowing graciously as she introduced Pegasus. "Always delighted to entertain a princess from the court of Her Royal Highness Ozma of Oz." "Oh, Calico! Then you do remember her? Oh, please, dear Calico, will you help us to find her?" "Find her? Why, what under the earth do you mean? Is Ozma lost?" Calico's long face at Dorothy's excited greeting grew visibly longer, and after the little girl had explained the disappearance of Ozma and the others, the enchantment of all the people in Oz, and the coming of Scamperoo to the Emerald City, Calico climbed wearily back on his throne and sat down. This is shocking," faltered Calico, mopping his forehead with a long gray cobweb. "And just what do you and this pig intend to do about it?" "What do you intend to do about it?" Rather tired of being called a pig, Pegasus planted all 4 feet and stared defiantly up at the perturbed metal monarch. "Well, that is, I don't see that it is affair at all," mumbled Calico with a rueful nod of his head. "Anyone powerful enough to conquer Ozma and Oz would pay small attention to opinions of mine. But we don't want your opinions," stated Pegasus bluntly. "What we want is your army and any magic you can conveniently spare." "Please, Calico, do help us," begged Dorothy, running up the carved rock steps of the throne and seating herself coaxingly on the arm. "With all your thousands of gnomes and many magic powers, we can certainly drive Scamperoo out of the Emerald City." "Well, of course," sighed Calico, flattered by Dorothy's reference to his magic powers. "I'll do what I can, but if what you say is true, it will take more than one army to reconquer Oz." As he said this, Calico looked across at Schufenwaller, and the little chamberlain, well pleased with his master's strategy, gave him an encouraging wink. "I tell you what I'll do." Calico crossed his legs and regarded Dorothy through half-closed eyes. "If you find another king willing to send his army into Oz, I will also send mine. Remember, even Ozma's closest friends and retainers have forgotten her, and the entire population, now fully convinced Scamperoo is their rightful ruler, will rise to oppose us. Yes, yes, but have you no magic that will dispel this wicked enchantment or help us to locate our friends and sovereigns? Demanded Pegasus, not wholly satisfied with the Gnome King's offer. No magic may be of no use in this case. Nevertheless, I will send for my wizard and see what can be done. Remembering their last experience with magic, Dorothy stepped down from Calico's throne and seated herself quietly on the pink pig's back, and Pegasus, grunting with relief, squinted suspiciously at the small, ugly wizard of the underworld, who presently came shuffling into the royal presence chamber. As quickly as possible, Calico explained to the wizard all the dire happenings in Oz. Do you think our magic spyglass could locate Ozma and her missing friends and associates, or tell us whether they have been utterly and? Potaroo, the king's magician, stood pulling his straggly whiskers for several moments after Calico had finished speaking. Then he stamped 4 times on the flagged floor with his right foot. Almost instantly, 4 gnome-wise men in peaked hats came into the throne room, wheeling a huge telescope before them. Dorothy and Pegasus, prickling with suspense and terror, watched the wizard screw his eye to the end of the twisting spyglass. After several snorts and surprised exclamations, Potaroo straightened up. The missing Ozians and the Wizard of Ev are hidden away in Thunder Mountain, he stated in a hoarse whisper. An electric little silence followed Potaroo's disclosure, and as no one uttered a sound, the wizard continued. As the spyglass is now pointing north, I believe you will find Thunder Mountain in that direction. But I must warn you that it will be a long and exceedingly dangerous journey. Danger? Well, what do we care for that? Quick, somebody fetch me my coat, my hat. This hardly seems a time for jokes and verses, murmured Calico, looking at Dorothy in mild disapproval. She has to make verses and rhymes when she rides me. I'm a poetry pig and a lucky star guides me, grunted Pegasus, too overcome by the wizard's awful news to realize he was speaking in verse himself. Oh, what difference does it make? Cried Dorothy, jumping quickly off his back. We must go to Thunder Mountain at once. Pegasus can fly there. Here, here, not in such a hurry, exclaimed Calico, secretly delighted at the prospect of being so easily rid of his troubles. We must pack you a lunch basket, and tell me, Potaroo, have you any magic that will make the journey less dangerous for these brave young adventurers? Magic, stuttered Potaroo, his eyes growing glassy at the mere thought of parting with any of his magic treasures. Well, I could lend them a box of my famous triple-action stumbling blocks. They will overthrow any enemy, no matter how numerous. Splendid, beamed Calico, rubbing his hands briskly together. And don't forget, in the course of your journey north, if you find a king willing to lend his army, my army also will be ready and at your service. Oh, Calico, how kind you are. Running up the steps of the throne again, Dorothy gave the Gnome King an impulsive hug. Come on, squealed Pegasus, who had seen the various winks between Calico and Shoofenwaller, and was convinced that the little Gnome King was doing as little as he possibly could. Give us our lunch and our stumbling blocks and we'll be off, and I must say they'll be an enormous help when we reach Thunder Mountain. Spreading his wings, Pegasus began to fly in angry circles round the Gnome King's head. Humph! Pork's going up, sniffed Shoofenwaller as he hurried away to see about packing the lunch basket. He ought to be dried, smoked, and salted, muttered Potaroo, going sulkily off to fetch the blocks. Dorothy, in earnest consultation with Calico, heard neither of these remarks, and when a few moments later the two returned with 2 boxes and Dorothy's hat and coat, she thanked them politely, called Pegasus down from a rocky ledge where he had flown and climbed happily on his back. Then Pegasus, not giving her time for any lengthy farewells, zipped through the tunneled caverns and corridors of the Gnome King's underground dominions and burst thankfully out the back door of South Mountain. "Now let's see, which way is north?" mused Pegasus, twirling his curly tail around like a propeller. "All we have to do is to fly north to Thunder Mountain, unlock its thunderbolts, restore the rulers of Oz, toss tumbling blocks at all enemies, raise a grand army, and then King Calico will help us." "Isn't it just too magniferous? Why, Piggins, how mean of you, surely you know. The Gnome King's our friend. Don't you like Calico?" "No," said Pegasus fiercely, hurling himself into the air. "Well, anyway, we're better off than we were before," thought Dorothy after several rhymed attempts to draw Pegasus into a conversation. "At least we now know where Ozma is and have two kinds of magic and the promise of an army. Really, we're getting on quite fast." But perhaps had she seen the king and his chamberlain nodding their heads like two little China mandarins as she and Pegasus left the throne room, she would not have felt so cheerful. "That's the last we'll ever see of her," chuckled Schufenwaller, dropping a dried lizard instead of a lump of sugar into his tea. "Gnomes always flavor their tea with lizards. No one yet has ever come safely back from Thunder Mountain. But what about this new Emperor of Oz? Oh, that will be all right." Calico waved one hand airily. "I would much rather have a man on the throne of Oz. Ozma is always involving me in wars or demanding the rights of smaller kingdoms. So long may she stay in Thunder Mountain, and long Scamperoo rule in Oz." "Long live the Emperor!" echoed Schufenwaller, and clicking their teacups gaily together, the two bad little gnomes drained to the last drop their black and bitter tea. "And we should not be too hard on Calico, I suppose, for, like all the dwellers under the earth, his heart is gray and flinty as the rock that forms his cavern, the blood in his veins cold and sluggish as the leaden waters of the underground rivers that wind sullenly through his dark domain." Chapter 14. The Emperor of Oz. The same morning Dorothy wakened in the rustic summer house of the Winky farmer. Scamperoo opened his eyes upon the unaccustomed grandeur of Ozma's royal palace. The banquet had lasted till long after 3 o'clock. Then, still chuckling and yawning, he had waved good night to his hilarious and amiable subjects and led Chalk off to bed. 20 footmen with 20 lighted tapers preceded him to Ozma's own apartment, but dismissing this as too plain and simple, he had taken the immense green guest suite across the hall. Chalk would have much preferred a stall in the royal stable with the other 4-footed members of the castle party, but Scamperoo would not hear of such a separation. He wanted his white wishing horse close at hand, not only because through him and the magic emeralds he could satisfy every wish, but because for the first time in his long, lazy, selfish life he had found someone he liked better than himself. In Scamperoo's eyes, Chalk was absolutely perfect, and as his own wish had brought the golden-maned charger into being, he felt proud and important as a parent with his first child. After a few regretful sniffs out of the window, a few short turns up and down their immense and elegant sleeping apartment, Chalk leaped lightly on one of the large green beds and settled himself gracefully for the night. Covering Chalk tenderly with a green satin quilt, Scamperoo hastily disrobed, and clutching his precious necklaces, climbed wearily into the other bed. There, without even stopping to wish himself good night, he fell into a deep and tranquil slumber. Indeed, both, in spite of the strangeness of their surroundings, slept soundly till morning. About 8 o'clock, Chalk, lifting his head from the embroidered pillow, looked indulgently across at the new Emperor of Oz. Sitting up in bed, Scamperoo was busily counting the gems in his 3 magic chains. "Ho, throw those silly beads away," advised the white horse, jumping out of bed with a gay toss of his golden mane. "You have nothing else to wish for, Kingaling, nothing more at all." This green carpet looks good enough to eat, but I've a fancy to nibble the clover in your Majesty's garden while it is still fresh with dew." "Say it again," begged Scamperoo, closing his eyes and clasping himself blissfully around the middle. "Your Majesty's garden, your Majesty's palace, your Majesty's kingdom of Oz," whinnied the white horse, rising on his hind legs and pirouetting round with mischievous little prances. "But come, Emp, what are your wishes for today? I think we will have to use the necklaces after all. You must certainly have some new clothes. It would never do to appear this morning in the suit you wore last night. You had better have some sleeping garments, too. I've a notion that emperors do not sleep in their raw hides like horses." Scamperoo, giggling self-consciously, dragged the satin sheets up to his chin, for to tell the truth, he had arrived in the Emerald City with only one suit to his back, and an extremely shabby one at that. "Maybe I'd better change my face, too," he murmured, "to go with all this, you know." Dreamily Scamperoo waved his hands about, and then, leaning forward, slipped the chains over Chalk's ear. "What's the matter with the face you have?" demanded Chalk, gazing fondly at the red, rotund countenance of his master. "I like you just as you are, and if you change I wouldn't even know you. But I'll tell you what you can wish after you've ordered yourself some new clothes. Wish yourself a seasoned rider, and then we can go far and wide, king-a-ling, far and wide at a furious gallop, and none shall say us nay." "Hey, hey!" "And none shall say us nay," trilled Scamperoo, rolling out of bed, covers and all. To wish himself 50 jewel-encrusted robes with boots, crowns, and all the undergarments to go with them, 50 splendid sleeping robes, and 50 suits of riding clothes took but a moment. He and Chalk could hear them landing with little thuds on the hangers in the many closets as Scamperoo finished speaking. Then, being naturally lazy, the new emperor wished that he had already had his bath and was dressed in his green riding clothes. So immediately he was, and winking at his clever assistant adviser, he next wished himself the best rider in Oz. Then, taking back his necklaces, he buttoned them carefully in a little pocket over his heart and went over to the mirror to have a look at himself. "How about this governing stuff?" puffed the self-made emperor, turning this way and that to get a good view of his new clothes. "Oh, I shouldn't bother about governing," answered Chalk carelessly. "A well-governed country like this should be able to run itself for a few weeks. By that time we'll be ready for more serious matters, but right now I'm all for enjoying myself. A splendid idea, that, of putting all the rulers and the wizard and his magic out of the way. The rest of your court and subjects are exceedingly sensible and jolly, and if we are pleasant and sensible too, everything will be what-ho and so cozy. So let's go below and start our first day of emperoring." Impatiently, Chalk pranced away toward the door. "You're sure I look all right?" asked Scamperoo with another anxious squint at his reflection. "Seems to me I'm a bit too fat." "Oh, don't worry about that," said Chalk, rolling his eyes wickedly. Come along, and I'll soon shake some of that fat off you. Up with you, King-a-ling, and let's to our oats." To his delight and pleasure, Scamperoo had not the slightest trouble mounting, and once in the saddle he felt perfectly at home, even when Chalk bounded through the door, took the long circular steps between a canter and a gallop, and ran madly 3 times round the royal gardens. On fine days, Ozma always had breakfast in her private garden, and it being an especially fine day, the palace servants without thought or question had placed the royal table under the trees. It was still fairly early, and none of the guests or members of the household were down, but this did not spoil Scamperoo's excellent appetite at all. Ordering Chalk a breakfast of oats, bran, and quartered apples, he seated himself gaily at the head of the table. The green riding hat, set well over one ear, became him vastly well, and Chalk, regarding him proudly from the foot of the table, thought him every inch an emperor, even if round the waist there were a good many too many inches. "I wish Penny Penny could see you now," sighed the horse, sinking contentedly back on his haunches, "and how I should have enjoyed seeing Matthia's face when he finally discovered you and the necklaces were gone. By the way, perhaps we should do something about Mattia." "Penny Penny will attend to him," said Scamperoo, popping a huge cherry into his mouth and nodding his head reassuringly. "I'll wager Penny Penny sent the fellow packing the moment he found himself king. Wonder how Penny is making out anyway." "But suppose Mattia should follow us here," went on Chalk. "Having been in existence only 2 days, he knew little of Oz or geosophy." "He can't come here," Scamperoo told him triumphantly. "There's a deadly desert between Scampavia and Oz that no one in my father's lifetime or in mine has ever crossed. That is with the exception of ourselves, and we were wished to cross, which doesn't count." Then, as 4 footmen with heaping trays appeared, he winked at Chalk, and the white horse lapsed into a thoughtful silence. And Scamperoo had been perfectly correct in his conjectures about Penny Penny. When, with a resounding clunk, the king's gold crown had fallen upon the astonished prime minister, his head had gone entirely through, so he was forced to wear it much as a dog wears a collar. But even so, he was not slow to realize the significance of this odd happening, or the power it brought with it. Gripping the scepter which had forced itself into his hand, he rushed into the throne room to find out what strange whim of his master had made him acting king of the realm. A glance around the throne room was enough to show him that Scamperoo was not there, and when he saw Mattia sitting so unconcernedly in the book alcove, a sudden rage and conviction seized him. Whatever had happened, Mattia was to blame. "Leave this palace at once," shouted Penny Penny, stamping first one foot and then the other. "At once, do you hear, or I'll call out the guard." Mattia, still deep in the history of Oz, looked up in astonishment. And when he saw the little prime minister wearing Scamperoo's crown round his neck and brandishing his scepter, he gave a perfect bellow of anger and dismay. "Where's the king?" he roared, looking wildly around the throne room. "And why are you wearing his crown? Where's Scamperoo? Where are the necklaces?" "Ask yourself!" raged Penny Penny, shaking the scepter threateningly. "Everything was quiet and peaceful till you and your necklaces arrived at this palace. There's some magic trickery about them and about you. Don't think I was fooled by that horse story. A horse does not appear out of the air. Well, now the king's gone. The horse is gone, and unless you are gone in 10 seconds, I'll have you thrown out of the window. 10 seconds, do you hear? This crown and scepter came to me through no wish or choice of my own, but since they did come to me, I am the king, and I intend to rule this country. My first official act will be to rid myself of your filthy presence. Now then, start walking, merchant, and don't stop till you reach the border. 20 guards will follow to see you safely out of the country." "You wait till Scamperoo hears about this," blustered Mattia, backing away in alarm from the determined little prime minister. "I'm more important to him than anyone else." "Then why aren't you with him?" inquired Penny Penny shrewdly. "No, wherever he's gone, he has gone without you. I am the king, and I do not need you, so be off." Clapping his hands, Penny gave a sharp command to the guards, who came hurrying in answer to his summons. Retiring rapidly to escape the tips of their sharp spikes, Mattia sullenly began his long march. It was nightfall by the time the little company reached the edge of Scampavia. Here, in a wilderness of rock and rubble, the guardsmen left him with food enough for a couple of days and stern warnings never to return to Scampavia. Far to the west the miserable merchant could see the comforting lights of Merryland, but he had no desire to go there or east to the kingdom of Ix. Instead, he stared hopelessly across the wilderness to where the heaving sands of the deadly desert gleamed like molten silver in the moonlight. How had that rascally monarch ever escaped without his seeing him? How could he ever safely cross the deadly desert and hope to reach Oz? How had Scamperoo, who seemed so dumb and foolish, ever discovered the secret of using the magic emeralds when he himself had failed to do so? How? Crouched on a flat rock, munching one of the sandwiches left by the guards, Matthias scowled evilly across the grim desert, his thoughts as treacherous and shifting as its deadly sands. Chapter 15. The Duners. All day, with only a short pause for lunch, Pegasus had flown north, Dorothy keeping a sharp lookout for Thunder Mountain or mountains of any sort, but the wild, desolate country through which they were flying was flat, desert-like, and apparently perfectly uninhabited. "A fine, healthy chance we have of finding an army here," snorted Pegasus as the afternoon drew to a hot, weary close. "And what we'll do when we find Thunder Mountain, I haven't the faintest notion, have you? Even if I butt my nose black, blue, and blunt, and you break both knuckles beating on its rocky exterior, how can we ever hope to enter such a place, much less release our unfortunate sovereigns? I told you Calico was a scoundrel. I'll wager he sent us on a wild goose chase just to get us out of the way." "Ah, don't say I told you so. There's always some way, you know," said Dorothy, almost as downhearted as Pegasus, though she would not admit it. The pink pig, rather ashamed of himself, flew for several miles without saying anything. Then, in rather a gruff voice, he called Dorothy's attention to the changing nature of the scenery below. "Notice the hills?" he snorted more hopefully. "Maybe there is a mountain after all, but the sun's going down and I'm ready to sink myself, so let's descend and see whether we can find a soft rock on which to lay our heads." "Not hills, dunes," cried Dorothy, bouncing off as soon as Pegasus touched the earth. "Sand dunes. We must be near the coast and the non-Estic Ocean." "It does smell salty," agreed Pegasus, sniffing the air eagerly. "But suppose we save the ocean for tomorrow. My feet ache, my wings ache, and I'm hollow as a drum." "Then we'll have supper," decided Dorothy sensibly. So seating themselves comfortably with their backs against a dune, the two weary explorers finished up all the cold meat, fruit, pie, and sandwiches Schufenwaller had packed up for them. After a long, wistful sniff into the box convinced him there was not another crumb, Pegasus folded his wings, lay down in the soft sand at the foot of the dune, giving only indistinct grunts and snorts to Dorothy's questions and observations. Finally, getting no answer at all, Dorothy discovered he was asleep. The regular rise and fall of the pink pig's sides, the soft, drowsy singing of the west wind, lulled Dorothy into a pleasant state of dreaminess, and presently, with her head comfortably pillowed on the pig's plump shoulder, she fell asleep too. It must have been hours later when terrified squeals from Pegasus and the patter of 100 hurrying feet made her start up in alarm. Still only half awake, she was startled to find herself and Pegasus surrounded by a horde of savage-looking sandmen. In the pale and watery moonlight they looked like creatures out of some very bad dream. Their bodies were roughly molded of sand, their eyes strangely green and phosphorescent, while their hair, rising like beach grass from their pointed heads, waved about their lumpy faces. Clutching the basket that contained her small store of clothing, the Black Witch's powder of darkness, and Potaroo's box of stumbling blocks, Dorothy pressed back against the dune. Her first idea of leaping on the pig's back and bidding him fly was useless. Pegasus lay helplessly on his side, his wings and legs bound tightly with long strands of tough, strong seaweed. Thankful to find that she at least was free, Dorothy went a step closer to her struggling, squealing, furious little comrade. As she did so, a perfect shower of sandballs came flying toward them. The sharp sting of the Sandman's missiles not only awoke her completely, but goaded her into instant and angry action. Stop that at once!" she cried, stamping her foot indignantly, but her words only brought another shower of sandballs down on their heads. "You have dared to invade the sacred domain of the Duners," yelled the rasping voice of the leader, rattling a long string of seashells he wore round his neck. "And therefore you shall be sand-balled, sand-bagged, and made into sandwiches for the sand crabs." If the Dooner had not looked so wild and dangerous, his foolish threat might have been amusing, but as he and his bandy-legged sandmen came leaping forward, Pegasus gave a squeal of sheer terror, and Dorothy, raising the basket over her head, hurled it with all her might into the midst of the advancing army. The effect was immediate and astonishing. Cowering down beside Pegasus and expecting to be seized or trampled on, Dorothy saw the first line of Dooners going down like a row of 10-pins. Then all the others began tumbling and tripping and falling in heaps. No sooner would a Sandman rise than he would instantly tumble down again, and their squalls and screeches of rage were so piercing Dorothy put both hands over her ears. "It's the blocks," wheezed Pegasus, managing to lift his head a few inches. "Calico's stumbling blocks are flying like fur and fury. Now, if they just keep 'em down for a while longer, we might get away." Dorothy, peering sharply into the midst of the tumbling Dooners, saw the 50 magic squares released from their box, when she flung her basket, fairly exploding with activity, and scramble up as they would after each tumble. The Sandmen could not advance an inch, nor even manage to stand erect. The leader, attempting to crawl forward on his hands and knees, was caught by a dozen of the whirling missiles and rolled back like a log among his churning comrades. "Hooray! 3 cheers for Calico," puffed Pegasus. "Quick, my girl, see if you can untie these wretched seaweeds, and we'll be flying and be off in a pig whistle." "I had a pair of scissors in my basket if it hasn't fallen out, and anyway, I'm not going without my things," declared Dorothy, now quite bold since the enemy had been overcome by magic. And in spite of the pig's anxious squeals of warning, she rushed forward, grabbed her basket, and began picking up her scattered belongings, noting with a sigh of relief that the box containing the powder of darkness was still closed. With the scissors still safe in the little pocket in the side of the basket, she soon clipped the seaweed trusses from Pegasus, and clasping the basket in her arms, climbed swiftly on his back. Pegasus, without one backward glance, rose straight into the air and again headed north. Dorothy, peering fearfully over his left wing, saw the Dooners spring suddenly to their feet and then, like frightened prairie dogs, disappear into many holes in the sand. "Funny," mused Dorothy, "that they had not noticed these openings before. Funny that the Dooners had stopped stumbling as soon as she and Pegasus had taken to the air. Funny. But then, everything was funny. Right in the middle of her conjectures, the box of stumbling blocks, now closed and tied with a red ribbon, dropped plink into the middle of her basket. "Someone's throwing things," gasped Pegasus, flapping his wings a bit faster and looking rather wildly over his shoulder. "No, just our box of stumbling blocks," yawned Dorothy. Now that the excitement was over, she felt dreadfully tired, and even the sight of the nonestic ocean rippling and gleaming a few yards ahead did not arouse or interest her. It did not interest Pegasus either. He was far from pleased to find himself so near the coast. "I don't like this at all," muttered the pig, perking up his ears and wiggling his nose rapidly. "We've flown straight north, and instead of striking Thunder Mountain, we strike the sea. And how could a mountain be in the middle of the sea?" "There are mountains on islands, and I have a notion. There are plenty of islands out there in the ocean," said Dorothy sleepily, recalling the days she had studied geography in the United States. "Take Japan, for instance, over there. Mountains are simply everywhere." "I don't care if they are," answered Pegasus fiercely. "I won't go to Japan, and I'll not go a wing's breadth over this ocean tonight, islands or no islands. Sa! Hey! There's the North Star to our left, so we're not going north at all. We're off our course, that's what we are." "North Star?" "North Star, of course we are," mumbled Dorothy with a drowsy nod. "You're asleep," scolded Pegasus in a worried voice. "I better land." If you land too soon, you'll strike a dune, warned Dorothy with another yawn. And after a quick glance below, and convinced they were still over the duner's domain, Pegasus spread his wings a bit wider and swung along the coast, looking carefully for a safe place to land and spend the rest of the night. He was so busy squinting downward that he never saw the long, curious tube-like shadow shooting after him with incredible accuracy and speed. A terrific blast of air as it rushed by them on the right was his first warning of danger. Dorothy, too, caught unaware, gave a faint shriek as an immense snake-like body curved back and began to coil round and round them like some gigantic air serpent. "It is a snake!" thought poor Dorothy, as Pegasus hung helplessly in the little circle of air left in the center of its coils. Neither spoke, for truly there seemed nothing to say or do. Then, just as the suspense grew too awful to be endured, the monster opened its mouth, and Dorothy, backing as far along the pig's back as she possibly could, almost lost her balance. Instead of a tongue or long tusks, out popped the head and shoulders of a little old man no larger than Dorothy herself. "Pardon me," he murmured politely. "I was looking for a sea serpent." "Do I look like a sea serpent?" snorted Pegasus in a quivering voice, for he was still half choked from shock and fright. "If you and that monster you're riding are looking for a sea serpent, go ahead, look for one, but leave honest travelers alone." "Monster!" exclaimed the little man in a hurt voice. "Oh, I say now, you have us all wrong. This is no monster. This is the long, strong, flexible, stretchable shooting tower of my private castle, and I, myself, am Bitty Bit, the seer of some summit." In the short silence that followed Bitty Bit's astonishing announcement, Dorothy, examining more closely the tube-like coils encircling herself and Pegasus, saw that they really were of stone with rubber-like sections between. What she had taken for a mouth was really a window. With his elbow resting on the ledge, Bitty Bit was regarding them fixedly. "Well, even if you are a seer and have a shooting tower," grunted Pegasus, gathering courage as he went along, "there is no reason for you to come towering over us this way." "But a seer must be constantly looking for things," explained Bitty Bit, spreading his hands expansively. "That, you know, is his business." "I am always looking for something, and tonight it happens to be sea serpents." "Sorry to disappoint you," said Pegasus more mildly, "but since we are not sea serpents, perhaps you'll be good enough to unwind your tower. As it happens, I have a little looking to do myself. As a matter of fact, when you and your tower overtook us, I was searching for a safe place for this young princess and myself to spend the night." "Look no more," begged Bitty Bit, leaning so far over the sill Dorothy involuntarily put out her hand to save him from falling. "You shall both spend the night in my castle. Come!" Grasping Dorothy by one hand and Pegasus by one wing, the little seer, with superhuman strength for one so small and wrinkled, dragged them both through the open window of his shooting tower. Chapter 16. The Seer of Some Summit. Since coming to Oz, Dorothy had traveled in many strange ways, but to find herself shooting through the midnight sky in Bitty Bit's tower was surely the oddest of all. Both she and Pegasus stared from the window in wide-eyed wonder as the tower uncoiled and started shrinking rapidly backward. "We may as well go home at once," observed Bitty Bit, rubbing his little hands briskly together. "You are much more interesting than sea serpents, and I can easily look for sea serpents some other night. Now don't be alarmed when we bump." "Bump?" repeated Dorothy rather nervously. "Of course," the sage told her calmly. "As I go forward, the tower stretches out in any direction I wish to go. When I return, it shrinks, contracts, and retires within itself like a telescope, and by the time we reach the castle, it is no larger than an ordinary tower." Better hold on to something, we're almost there." Running around the circular room a few feet from the wall was a gold railing. Pegasus had just time to hook his wing around this railing and Dorothy to seize it with one hand, when Bitty Bit's tower with a resounding crash snapped back, but up to a vertical position, so that what had been the floor of the little room became the east wall and the window a skylight. Dorothy and Pegasus, describing a complete circle on the bar, landed in a more or less upside-down position on what had been the back wall. "That's why I have it cushioned," explained the seer, who also had executed a neat somersault. Hopping up, as if landing on his head was a perfectly usual and ordinary occurrence, Bitty Bit opened a trapdoor in the floor and motioned for Dorothy and Pegasus to follow him down a long winding stair. "These magic contraptions will be the death of me," wheezed Pegasus, picking himself up with a groan. The cushioned floor had made his fall painless, but he was considerably jolted and upset from the shock, or rather the series of shocks that had so far punctuated their evening.
"But if he's a seer,"
whispered Dorothy, recovering her basket and trotting eagerly after Bitty Bit.
"he ought to be able to help us
"Bitty Bit," sniffed the pink pig. "Well, if he'll just help me to a bed, I'll be satisfied." And grunting and grumbling, he clumped sleepily down the stairs behind Dorothy. The room into which the stone stairway led them was evidently the cozy and comfortable study of the comical little seer. Its walls were of oak, lined from floor to ceiling with books, and all its furnishings were tan or brown. Dorothy considered this extremely suitable, as Bitty Bit himself looked like a very wise and merry brownie. On his little round head was a round cap with a yellow quill, and he wore a brown wrinkled robe rather like a monk's, tied tightly round the waist with a yellow cord. His bright, black, sharp little eyes danced with good humor and interest in his sun-tanned, honest little face. While Pegasus stood sleepily and somewhat disapprovingly on the hearthrug, Dorothy sank into a snug brown armchair and looked expectantly up at their singular host. "No, no, not a word," begged Bitty Bit, raising his hand pleadingly. "Remember, I am the seer of some summit, a seer who can see and foresee, a seer who can tell and foretell. Just by closing my eyes I can tell who you are, whence you came, and whither you are going." "Fancy that now," observed Pegasus in a mocking voice. "You," retorted Bitty Bit, pointing a skinny brown finger at the pig, "you are a creation of my friend the Red Jinn, whose taste for low verse I always knew would lead him into some mischief." "Low verses?" retorted Pegasus indignantly, while even Dorothy looked a little shocked.
"Yes, low verses,"
insisted Bitty Bit solemnly. "You are so constructed that he who rides must rhyme and break into foolish jingles. Is this not so?" "They may be jingles, but they are not low verse," protested Pegasus, flapping his ears angrily. "Well, then, let us call them simple verses," amended Bitty Bit with a generous wave of the hand. "At least they are verses that anyone can understand, which, of course, makes them of no value whatever. People never appreciate what they can understand." "Dorothy does," declared Pegasus, now mad enough to fly right out the window. "Dorothy. Ah, yes, I was coming to her." Swinging around, Bitty Bit, his eyes still tightly shut, wagged his finger at the astonished little girl. "You are the mortal girl who came to Oz by cyclone. You live in the Emerald City of Oz and are—" "Oh, tell us something we don't already know," interrupted Pegasus with a bored yawn. "Where is Ozma of Oz now? How could a scalawag emperor steal her throne?" "Wait, wait! Give me time! Not a word more! Not a word!" panted Bitty Bit, advancing with short dancing steps toward Dorothy. I see a necklace," he muttered mysteriously. "1, 2, 3 necklaces. I see a white horse and a fat red-faced fellow wearing a small emerald crown. Great sea bass and sassafras. Oz has been conquered, its inhabitants enchanted, its rulers banished, and the king of Scampavia sits on the throne." So that's where he comes from, breathed Dorothy, forgetting Bitty Bit's request for silence. Oh, quick, tell us more, and help us to restore Ozma and the other lost sovereigns to power. I am only a seer, answered the sage, opening his eyes wide, and suddenly, I can see and foresee, tell and foretell, but I cannot change that which has happened or is about to happen. But where is Ozma? Demanded Pegasus, edging closer. If you are a seer and can see her, at least you can tell us where she is. In this way, Pegasus hoped to check up the information given them by Potoroo, the Gnome King's wizard. So again Bitty Bit closed his eyes and pressing his fingers to his forehead spoke. Ozma, my old friend Jinnicky, the Wizard of Oz, a soldier with green whiskers, a purple horse, 2 queens, 2 kings, a prince, the Tin Woodman and Glinda the good sorceress are lying at the bottom of Lightning Lake, which is on the top of Thunder Mountain, Bitty Bit told them solemnly. Lightning Lake! Cried Dorothy, seizing the little seer frantically by the shoulders. Why then, they must be drowned, burned, and destroyed altogether. No, no, they are quite calm, and as usual, Bitty Bit assured her hastily. In fact, they are, I should say, in a trance of some kind. But what'll we do? How'll we disenchant them or find Thunder Mountain? Loosing her hold on Bitty Bit, Dorothy spun round 3 times and then started firmly for the door. My shooting tower will take you to Thunder Mountain or any other place you decide you must go, promised Bitty Bit, hurrying anxiously after the little girl. But not tonight, Dorothy, not tonight. We are all tired and I must have time to think. The conquering of Oz is a great shock to me. I would like time to look into the matter more fully and consider all of these strange events in their proper order. This problem shall be my pillow. I'll sleep on it, my dear, and in the morning will doubtless have something helpful to suggest. Well then, where are the beds? Yawned Pegasus, who heartily approved of Bitty Bit's suggestion. Or are we to sleep on our problems too? At this, Bitty Bit, who seemed to find Pegasus terribly amusing, laughed right out loud. Then taking Dorothy's arm, he led the way to a snug little bedroom all done in yellow. Pegasus had a gentlemanly apartment in tan next door, and both were so weary they spent little time examining their new quarters, but instead went directly to bed and to sleep. When Dorothy wakened next morning, she looked out the window and saw Pegasus flying in slow circles round the tidy castle. Bitty Bit's brown stone palace, though small and unpretentious, perched right on top of some summit, and the view was so fine and the mountain air so fresh and invigorating, Dorothy, in spite of all her anxiety and worry, began to feel happy and reckless and ready for anything. With cheerful little glances round her cozy yellow room, she dressed, brushed her hair till it shone, then skipped merrily down the brown marble steps and out into the garden. The garden, really a series of sloping terraces, was bright with hardy mountain posies, with spicy sage bushes and gnarled old trees which clung like acrobats to the steep rocks and dangerous crevices. Pegasus, catching a glimpse of Dorothy seated on a smooth rock near a little waterfall, came swooping down to wish her a merry morning. "Not a bad little palace," remarked the pig considerately. "Not a bad little palace at all, though so far as I can see there's not a man-servant nor a woman-servant or even a ladybug about. I imagine this fellow is a hermit, and from the looks of him probably lives on tobacco and snuff. What do you suppose are the chances for breakfast?"
I don't know,
said Dorothy, refusing to allow such a small matter as breakfast to dash her spirits.
Have you seen Bitty Bit this morning?
Yes, sniffed Pegasus, beginning to poke his nose hungrily round the roots of a dwarf oak. Before I flew out my window, I saw him going into his brown study. Seer goes into brown study.
How's that for you're awful?
Laughed Dorothy, giving Pegasus a little push. No, just awfully hungry, grinned Pegasus. Now I've been thinking. No? Stepping out from behind a sizable bush, Bitty-Bit regarded the pig with an air of assumed amazement.
He says he's been thinking,
He repeated, turning solemnly to Dorothy.
Must be the air up here.
That's about all I've had, retorted Pegasus, savagely crunching an acorn between his teeth. That and a nibble from one of your sage bushes. Sage bush, eh? Chuckled Bitty-Bit, winking at Dorothy. That's good, and we'll make a sage of you yet, a sausage, he whispered in an undertone that Pegasus heard quite distinctly. And speaking of sausage, how about breakfast? Though Bitty-Bit's remark about the sausage still rankled, Pegasus was too hungry to let it keep him from following the seer into a small walled garden that opened out from the larger dining hall of his castle. Here, on a small table covered with a gay yellow cloth, was assembled the most appetizing breakfast Dorothy ever had tasted. Ripe melon and apricots, cereal and eggs, tiny meat pies, pancakes and honey, hot rolls and steaming brown cocoa. There was a huge bowl of mush and cream for Pegasus and another of buttermilk, and under the soothing influence of his favorite foods, Pegasus completely forgot his annoyance, and they were soon chattering away like old friends at a Sunday school picnic. Bitty-Bit's chef, whom the pig had overlooked in his grand tour of the palace, served them with skill and speed. No wonder Pegasus had not seen him, for he was even smaller than his wrinkled little master and almost completely enveloped in a great brown linen apron and tall brown cap. Dorothy could not possibly eat all the dainties pressed upon her by the kind little seer and his chef, but she nibbled at each course, and when Bitty-Bit saw that neither she nor Pegasus could down another bite, he swallowed the rest of his cocoa and bounced briskly to his feet. "Now," he cried, tossing away his gay napkin with a flourish. "Now for the Emerald City and Oz."
But I thought we were going to Thunder Mountain,
exclaimed Dorothy, pushing back her chair so hurriedly she bumped her head on the wall.
"That!"
exclaimed Bitty-Bit, looking over his shoulder, for he was already halfway through the door. "That will not be necessary. All we need to save the celebrities of Oz is the long-lost wishing emeralds of Lorna the Wood Nymph." "Lorna!" coughed Pegasus, rolling out of his seat and falling a bit sideways. "For pity's sake, who's she?" "Oh, come along," urged Dorothy, and without wasting another second she pelted into the brown palace after Bitty-Bit. With a groan, Pegasus followed, and groaned again when he realized he would have to climb 3 flights of marble steps and a flight of stone to reach the famous shooting tower. Then, suddenly and joyfully remembering his wings, he spread them wide. "Wings, hold me up," mumbled the pink pig stuffily. "We're carrying entirely too mush. Rising rather uncertainly, he breathlessly flapped his way up to the tower room where Dorothy and Bitty-Bit impatiently awaited him. Chapter 17. Scamperoo in Oz. In the company of Scraps, the Scarecrow, the royal visitors, and all the amusing members of Ozma's court, the Emperor and Chalk passed a gay and hilarious morning. The tableau and pageants proceeded without a single hitch, and no one seemed to miss Dorothy or Pegasus at all, nor did anyone notice the omission of the carefully planned groups showing the wizard's arrival in Oz, Dorothy's first visit to the Emerald City, or the victory of Nick Chopper over the wolves. These interesting and historical events might just as well never have happened. Notta's circus later in the afternoon went off with a bang, even without Pegasus to jump through hoops and fly round the ring waving flags, while Scraps did her balance, defying acts on the trapeze and tight rope. The picnic supper was even more fun than the circus, and the fireworks, set off by Tick-Tock, who was in no danger of scorching himself, the best of all. Indeed, Scamperoo's first day in the Emerald City had been so full and so interesting, he had not made a single wish or once thought of his magic emeralds. "Funny we never had jolly times like this at home," mused Scamperoo, putting out the emerald stars in the ceiling that pleasantly lighted his green apartment and burrowing happily down into his splendid green bed. "Oh, Chalk, are you asleep there, old horse?" As no answer came from the other bed, Scamperoo let himself sink a bit deeper into the luxurious nest of silken covers and soon was asleep himself, puffing and whistling like a steamboat. But the strange and frightful snoring of the Emperor did not seem to stop nor scare away the shadowy figure that presently came stealing into the royal chamber. Once, twice, 3 times, long, skinny fingers reached out toward the thick neck of the snoring ruler of Oz. The 4th time there were 3 distinct little clips, and when the curving talon-like claw withdrew, it had in its clutching grasp the 3 powerful wishing chains. Then, without waking the occupant of either bed, the thief stole quietly into the shadows. Now the Scarecrow, delighted with the success of the celebration so far, had suggested a series of athletic contests and obstacle races for next day, and Scamperoo had heartily agreed to his plans. His first thought on waking was the race to be run by the straw man and himself, the Scarecrow on the wooden sawhorse, he on his splendid white charger. "I'll wear the white leather breeches and shirt," puffed Scamperoo, bounding out of bed like a schoolboy. He had taken a shower and donned his showy riding clothes before he missed his magic emeralds. Then, all at once, as he stood before the mirror to comb his hair, he gave a loud squall of anguish. "Chalk! Chalk!" roared the distracted Emperor, racing over to the balcony and leaning so far out over the railing he nearly fell on his crown. "They're gone! They're gone! My emeralds! My necklaces!" "My necklaces! My emeralds!" Now Chalk, who had risen early to nibble the clover while it was still fresh with morning dew, looked up in alarm. Then, as his master's voice grew louder and louder and his gestures more spectacular and desperate, the white horse rose up on his hind legs and shook his head in violent warning and displeasure. "Hush," he directed in a low voice. "I'll be right up." Making his way quickly but cautiously so as not to arouse the curiosity of any of the palace servants, already at work in the lower hallways, Chalk hurried up to the agitated Emperor. "They're gone," blubbered Scamperoo, sitting on the edge of the bed and crying like a baby. Gone. Now everything is ruined and I'll have nothing left at all." "Well, you still have me," murmured Chalk, resting his head affectionately on Scamperoo's shoulder. "Brace up, Kingaling, and for oath's sake be quiet. No one here knows about the necklaces, and until the rascal who has stolen them learns how to use them, we are as safe as soap. That rascal, of course, is Mattia. Somehow he has managed to cross the deadly desert. Yes." Chalk shook his mane wrathfully. "I am convinced that Mattia has the necklaces, but what good are they to him when we alone know the secret that makes them work? He'll have to come to us in the end, and when he does—" "Ha ha!" Chalk expelled the air from his nose in a terrific snort. "Just let me take care of him. But shouldn't we give the alarm, have a search made for him, and try to recover the emeralds?" "Let him alone," counseled the wishing horse firmly. "The thing for you to do is to sit tight on the throne of Oz. Remember, you are still the Emperor. But how can I be without those emeralds?" Scamperoo dabbed at his eyes with the satin bedsheet. "We got along all right yesterday," said Chalk calmly. "Come, cheer up, Scamper. Everything will be all right." "I rather counted on beating the Scarecrow in that race this morning," muttered Scamperoo wistfully. "How can you run as fast as that tireless wooden creature who was magically brought to life?" "Well, wasn't I magically brought to life?" The white horse shook his mane roguishly. "Come along, Kingaling. We'll not only win that race, but we'll have back our necklaces and chase Mattia out of Oz before we are through." I really believe you can do anything," sighed Scamperoo, getting almost cheerfully to his feet. "But just the same, I shall keep a sharp outlook for Mattia. He might start a revolution." "He'll revolute pretty rapidly if I once get my heels on him," promised Chalk with a wicked grin. "Come on, heads up, and who's afraid?" However, in spite of the white horse's valiant attempts to comfort him, Scamperoo spent a troubled and uneasy day, casting fearful glances behind him when no one was looking, searching the happy holiday crowds with haggard glances for a glimpse of the long, thin face of Mattia the merchant. Even when Chalk beat the sawhorse in their long, exciting race through the park, and the crowds cheered themselves hoarse with delight and approval, the victory was spoiled by the knowledge that somewhere in the Emerald City lurked his most dangerous and relentless foe. Chalk, too, though he pretended to regard the matter lightly, was almost as worried as his master, and spent every free moment poking his head into doorways and peering down side streets and rearing up over walls. And while Scamperoo was having his afternoon nap, the white horse systematically searched the palace from top to bottom, even the cellar. But in the cellar Chalk did not go quite far enough, for it was in a hollowed-out chamber under the cellar that the merchant of Scampavia was really hidden. Here, with a goodly supply of food stolen from the pantry, Mattia had seriously settled down to work out the problem of the emerald necklace. He had meant to conceal himself in the cellar itself, but when his foot brushed against an iron ring in the floor, he had lifted it up and discovered to his delight and satisfaction this still more secluded and safe retreat. The tunnels and rocky chambers below the palace had been constructed and used by Rougadou, the old gnome king, when he was plotting to capture the Emerald City. Rougadou himself had been captured, but the underground caves and passageways had been left pretty much as they were. There were a number of chairs, a rough bed and table, and numerous candles and lamps. Altogether, it made an ideal workshop for the merchant to try out his experiments. In the cellar, he might easily have been discovered by any of the kitchen boys sent down for supplies, but in Rougadou's old hideout he could be sure of complete privacy. Lighting the largest of the lamps that hung on its rusty chain over the table, Mattia seated himself on a rickety old chair and prepared to concentrate with all his willpower on the glittering emeralds. In the sickly green light he made a strange and sinister figure as he bent over the table, mumbling and chattering to himself. But after a whole day, during which he tried every known formula and combination, touching each gem in succession as he made his wish and counted to 100, he was still no nearer the solution of the mystery than he had been in Scampavia. First, he had tried the diamond clasp of the third necklace, sure that that was the key to their power. But nothing at all had happened, and the trick of the magic emeralds continued to elude him. To have in his fingers the means to immense power and good fortune and still be unable to benefit was so infuriating, Mattia began to stamp, splutter, and beat his chest with rage and disappointment. Was it for this he had bribed a red eagle with the promise of 3 wishes to carry him across the deadly desert? Even now the mammoth bird was waiting impatiently on the edge of a little wood near the city, ready to tear him to pieces if he failed to fulfill his part of the bargain. No daylight penetrated into the tunneled chamber, and hardly realizing that it was now midnight, Mattia, from sheer weariness and exasperation, finally gave up and fell asleep, his head on the table, his hands still clutching the provoking chains. Footsteps pattering overhead wakened him at last, and also told him someone had come to the cellar for supplies. Stretching wearily, he rose and, going over to the stone steps, cautiously ascended and lifted the trap-door. Now thoroughly convinced that the necklaces would not work unless worn by someone else, he determined to seize the first person entering the cellar and compel him to help. The merchant did not have long to wait. All unconscious of the part he was to play in Mattia's dark schemes, a young kitchen boy came whistling his way toward a great golden bin of potatoes. The bin was just beyond the trap-door, and lowering it to a mere crack, Mattia let the boy pass. Then, as he leaned down to fill his basket, the wily merchant flung up the trap-door, fell upon the boy, and carried him kicking and screaming down the stairs. Here, with threats, promises, and innumerable shakings, he finally reduced the poor lad to a state of frightened submission. With the sparkling necklaces round his neck, he touched one and then another of the emeralds as Mattia wished and counted and counted and wished. After each unsuccessful trial, the merchant would rage and stamp and shake his fists, till the boy was quite convinced he was in the presence and power of a madman, and frantically waited for someone to overhear Mattia's ravings and come down to rescue him. But nobody did. While the unfortunate kitchen boy was spending a miserable morning in the underground chamber, Scamperoo and Chalk were going through the motions of enjoying themselves above stairs, but without any real zest or pleasure. Only half-heartedly Scamperoo laughed at the jokes of the Scarecrow, and Chalk, for all his bright interest in the long recital of Kabumpo's adventures, was really in a fidget of uneasiness, trying to keep an eye on all the doors and windows in the throne room at once. Something was going to happen. The white horse felt it in every bone. And just as the soft musical gong sounded the call for luncheon, his worst fears were realized. Suddenly, without reason or warning, the castle was plunged into total darkness. Thumps, bumps, hysterical shouts, and screams followed closely on the heels of this disconcerting event. Chalk, who had been standing back of Scamperoo, immediately leaned forward and grasped his impetuous little master by the seat of his royal breeches.
"Lay still,"
commanded the white horse through his teeth and the white leather of Scamperoo's riding pants, and he held on for dear life as the Emperor, like all the rest of the court and guests, tried to rush in every direction. "He's done it! He's done it, and everything is ruined!" wailed Scamperoo, struggling in vain to pull away from Chalk. "Mattia has discovered the secret of the necklaces, and now we are ruined. Do you hear? Ruined." "I hear," hissed Chalk, giving Scamperoo a little shake, "and so will everyone else unless you shut your mouth." "Be quiet, I tell you. Do nothing till the right moment, unless you want to dash out your brains against a pillar in the dark." Too frightened to argue or struggle further, Scamperoo at last subsided. All about courtiers, servants, and guests were screaming and bumping into each other or the furniture, and when a stern hand suddenly seized his bridle, Chalk trembled violently in spite of himself. "Follow me," directed a firm, stern little voice, "and no harm will come to you." Now, Chalk had been expecting to see or hear Mattia, and the sound of this small, strange voice was a welcome relief and surprise. Taking a firmer hold on Scamperoo, he thrust out his head in an endeavor to touch or feel the newcomer. As he did so, the hand on his bridle began to tug him gently but firmly forward. "Look out there. Mind what you are about. The Emperor of Oz is just ahead," whinnied Chalk, now thoroughly alarmed. "We are not used to taking orders from strangers." "Oh, we won't be strangers long," promised the strange voice pleasantly. "So this is the Emperor of Oz, and is this the way you usually carry him?" "Come on, Bitty Bit, what's the use of all this arguing?" put in another voice impatiently. "Let's get out of that confusion. The wizard's laboratory is right across the hall. Tell him to come there." "A girl!" decided Chalk with another gulp of relief. "Maybe we are not so badly off after all." And lifting his head in spite of Scamperoo's great weight, he spoke proudly and confidently. "Whoever you are, we welcome you to Oz, and if you can explain this unearthly and unexpected darkness, we will gladly follow you and do as you say."
Good,
chuckled Bitty-Bit, tugging manfully at his bridle.
this way, please.
There was still so much screaming and confusion in the throne room, no one had overheard the conversation between the newcomers and the Emperor's horse, and, guided by the invisible hand, Chalk crossed the room without bumping into anything or anybody. A moment later they were in the dark, quiet laboratory that had once belonged to the Wizard of Oz. Chapter 1. The Emperor's Horse Makes a Bargain. Bitty Bit's shooting tower had made a record trip to the Emerald City, and guided by the little seer of some summit, had come to a deft and dexterous stop right outside the windows of the great throne room. After a short, anxious look inside, and before anyone was aware of their arrival, Dorothy removed the lid from the box of the powder of darkness and threw a generous pinch into the air, plunging the Emerald City into an instant and thunderous dark. Under cover of this magic darkness, Dorothy, Pegasus, and Bitty Bit boldly entered the palace and singled out the white horse and his terrified master. They had fully expected some resistance. Dorothy had brought a long piece of rope, and Pegasus carried a stout club under his wing. But they were delighted to find the Emperor too frightened and his white horse too clever to resist an invisible foe. Being able to see in the dark themselves, they had Chalk and Scamperoo at a decided advantage. Dorothy's plans, now that they had actually returned to the Emerald City, were rather vague, but Bitty Bit knew just what he hoped and intended to do. His seerish powers had enabled him to discover that all the changes in Oz had been brought about by the magic emeralds which in some way had fallen into Scamperoo's hands, and these emeralds Bitty Bit meant to have at the earliest possible moment. So first he ordered all the windows and doors in the laboratory closed, then, annoyed by the screams and crashes still issuing from every room in the castle, he advised Dorothy to put the lid back on the powder of darkness. "But supposing someone disturbs us before we finish," objected Pegasus, looking doubtfully at the tremendous warhorse, who stood with feet braced and ears back ready to listen or defy them. Somehow Chalk had managed to toss Scamperoo back into the saddle, and with both hands fixed grimly in the horse's mane, the Emperor was blinking his eyes in a vain attempt to see them or catch a glimpse of Mattia, for he was convinced that the merchant was at the bottom of the whole procedure. "If we agree to lift this pall of darkness, will you agree to grant us an uninterrupted hour of your time?" asked Bitty Bit, turning toward the Emperor, but really addressing the horse, whom he considered the better man of the two. "I think we can, without undue danger, promise that," answered Chalk guardedly, while Scamperoo hemmed and hawed with indecision. "Of course, you must promise to use no more magic against us." "Well, the same goes for you, too, remember," put in Pegasus quickly. "An hour's time and conversation and no trickery." "But who are you?" muttered Scamperoo, finding his voice at last. "I seem to hear 3 different voices." "You'll soon see," answered Dorothy, clapping the lid on her powder of darkness. With a suddenness that made them all gasp, the laboratory was again flooded with the bright noon sunshine, and in a determined row before him, Scamperoo saw a pretty little girl in green, a fat pink pig with white wings, and a small wrinkled old gentleman in brown. "Why," whinnied Chalk, drawing in a deep breath of relief. "At first I thought you were enemies, but now I see that you are merely visitors and friends." "That depends," observed Bitty Bit, seating himself on a tall stool that brought him on a level with Chalk's nose. "I am the seer of some summit, but these others are Princess Dorothy and Pegasus, the winged pig. They really belong in this palace and are close friends of the rightful ruler of this country, Ozma of Oz." "I am the rightful ruler of Oz," shouted Scamperoo, growing red in the face and thrusting out his 3 chins belligerently. "Oh, don't bother putting on a show for me," exclaimed Bitty Bit, waving his arms impatiently. "Remember, I am a seer, I know all, I see all, and what is more, I tell all. You, my pretty fellow, are really the king of Scampavia, a small, no-count country on the other side of the deadly desert. In some way, the long-lost necklaces of Lorna the Wood Nymph have come into your possession. With these necklaces, you have enchanted the people of Oz into believing you are their ruler. You have wickedly banished Ozma and her allies and counselors and unlawfully made yourself Emperor of Oz." "That seems to cover everything," drawled Chalk, as Scamperoo turned from red to purple. Not everything, went on Bitty-Bit, shaking his finger sternly under Chalk's nose. Kingdoms are not won and held by trickery, my friends, and we are here to see that those necklaces are returned and the kingdom of Oz restored to its proper rulers. And suppose we refuse? Suggested the White Horse in a bored voice. What then? Why then? Bitty-Bit threw back his shoulders and spun round several times on his shiny stool. Why then it means war. Bitty-Bit did not say who were his friends or allies or where he should get his armies, but he spoke with such firm confidence, both Scamperoo and Chalk were taken aback and completely dismayed. Mattia had been bad enough, but this strange and determined little seer was worse. Perhaps we can make a bargain, or come to some agreement, suggested Chalk, resolved to save what he could for himself and his master. Suppose King Scamperoo and I agree to return the emerald necklaces, which undoubtedly belong in Oz. Will you grant us the privilege of using them twice for ourselves? But, Scamperoo was about to blurt out the fact that they no longer had the necklaces when Chalk gave him a savage nip on the leg which silenced him effectively. Why should we do that? Inquired Pegasus, fluttering his wings nervously. After all the grief and worry you have caused us, you are lucky to get off with your skins. Where are the necklaces now? Asked Dorothy, stepping close to Chalk and looking eagerly up into the face of the discomfited Emperor. Scamperoo's face grew long as a balloon suddenly punctured, but remembering Chalk's last bite, he managed to keep silent. When you have answered our question, we will answer yours, stated Chalk, firmly but pleasantly. You can, of course, appeal to the court and members of the household, but I think you will find them entirely satisfied with their present emperor and ready to stand by him to the last man. At Chalk's words, Bitty-Bit looked rather crestfallen. As the White Horse had so quietly stated, they were perfectly powerless to take the necklaces by force, and a quick inspection of the Emperor, when he first reached the palace, had convinced him Scamperoo was not wearing the precious emeralds. At this rather embarrassing moment, a series of thumps, kicks, and knocks on the door made not only the rescuers, but the Emperor and Chalk turn rather pale. Oh, it's Mattia, quavered Scamperoo, whose nerves were. Oh, what'll we do now? Hold your tongue, advised Chalk, and swinging round he trotted briskly over to the door. Who's there? He demanded in a dignified voice. 'Tis I, Iva, the kitchen boy, stuttered a frightened treble. I must see the Emperor at once. Well, shall we let him in? Bitty-Bit looked uneasily at Pegasus and Dorothy, and then rather thoughtfully at Chalk. Suit yourselves, yawned the White Horse indifferently. It's probably a messenger telling us the pudding is cold with all this delay and darkness. You asked for an hour's time and conversation, and we agreed to that demand, so it is for you to decide what to do, not us. Oh, let him in, fumed Pegasus, and tell him to stop this hammering and yammering. What harm is there in a kitchen boy? So Bitty-Bit, taking the key from the lock and squinting through the keyhole to assure himself there was only a small boy outside, quickly admitted him. Now in darted Iva, screaming loudly of a madman in the cellar and bursting into tearful and incoherent recital of his woes. Scarcely had he got out 2 sentences before Scamperoo fell bodily off his horse and made a desperate snatch at the kitchen boy's throat. But Bitty-Bit was too quick for him. His eyes, too, had caught the glimmer of emeralds, and jerking the 3 chains from the lad's neck as Chalk made a savage lunge forward, he tossed them to Pegasus. Catching them on his nose as cleverly as a trained seal, the pink pig spread his wings and flew up to the top of a tall cabinet, where he sat panting and puffing with satisfaction and defiance. "Come down, you fat scoundrel!" roared Scamperoo, dancing up and down like a dervish, while the poor kitchen boy, outraged by the way both Scamperoo and Bitty-Bit had rushed upon him, burst into loud sobs and, rushing out the still-open door, ran crying down the corridor. Slamming the door and locking it after him, Bitty Bit rather anxiously waited for Chalk's next move, and as usual Chalk was quite prepared and ready to make it. "Well," he observed with a jaunty flick of his tail, "now that you have the famous wishing emeralds, I suppose you are satisfied, and we may as well go. Come along, Scamperoo, you will get nowhere in an argument with a pig. Just casting pearls before swine, you know, and he already has our emeralds." "You mean your wishing necklaces," shrieked Pegasus furiously, "and I'll tell you what I wish. I wish that you and your silly master were clams at the bottom of the monastic ocean." Thoroughly shocked and startled by the pink pig's unexpected wish, Bitty Bit and Dorothy rushed toward the cabinet, hoping in some way to prevent the wish from taking effect. But they need not have worried, for of course nothing happened at all. Then Scamperoo, urged by Chalk, hastily climbed into the saddle. "Well," whinnied the white horse, twitching his ears provokingly, "goodbye to you, goodbye, we'll just be trotting along. Wait, look here, hold on a bit." The little seer of some summit stepped angrily in front of the white horse. "How do these emeralds work? How are we to disenchant the rulers of Oz and restore Ozma to the throne unless we know the proper way to use these magic chains?" "I'm afraid that's your problem," sighed Chalk, rolling his eyes round at Scamperoo. "Come now, my little mannequin, open up the door. We kept our promise, and you must keep yours. After all, my master has done no real harm here. There has been no war or bloodshed. In fact, everything has been decidedly gay and jolly. If his laudable ambition to better himself brought Ozma and her counselors a little well-earned rest, at least they have suffered no pain or unpleasantness, and are perfectly unaware of what has happened to them. Open the door, I tell you, or I'll call for help, and there are many in this palace who would gladly come to our assistance." "Oh, oh, what shall we do?" wailed Dorothy, as Bitty Bit stood uncertainly with his back to the door.
"You're the horridest horse I've ever known."
"Well, that's all in the way you look at me," answered Chalk, staring steadily into Dorothy's eyes. "You, my dear, are fond of your mistress, Queen Ozma of Oz, and are trying to help her. I, on my part, am exceedingly fond of my master, the King of Scampavia, and am trying to help him. You can't blame me for that, you know." "The creature is right," sighed Bitty Bit, "and we'll have to agree to his plans, preposterous though they are." "That would, of course, be the sensible thing to do," murmured Chalk, lowering his eyes modestly. "You grant me 2 wishes, and I will tell you the proper way to use the magic wishing chains. But suppose they are bad wishes?" "I mean," Bitty Bit corrected himself hastily, "good for you, but bad for us. What then?" "With the necklaces in your possession, you could wish yourselves away in an instant." "That," admitted Chalk, "is perfectly true, but I am afraid you will have to take that chance. And trust me, never do it, never do it," squealed Pegasus, who now had the necklaces tucked tightly under his wing. "We might as well throw ourselves out of the window." But Bitty Bit, closing his eyes and pressing his fingers close to his forehead, made no reply. "I'll trust you," he said after a short silence, and opening his eyes he looked cheerfully up at the white horse. "Hand down those necklaces, Pegasus, and be quick about it too. I hear footsteps in the passageway." "Well, don't blame me if we're turned to pretzels and pumpernickel," grunted the pig, dropping the necklaces into the seer's outstretched hand. "Goodbye, all." Turning his back in disgust and covering his ears with his wings, Pegasus waited in fear and trembling for the end. But Bitty Bit quite calmly handed the emeralds to Scamperoo, and Scamperoo immediately draped them over Chalk's left ear. "Now then," murmured Chalk, looking firmly back at the unhappy Emperor, "repeat exactly what I say, and all will yet be well." "I wish," began Chalk, while Scamperoo listened with bulging eyes, "I wish that the 5 wishes I make when we return to Scampavia shall be instantly granted." As Scamperoo repeated the wish and slowly started to count to 100, Dorothy fidgeted with uneasiness, and Pegasus fairly groaned with alarm, for it seemed to them both that their danger had only been postponed and not averted. "My second wish I will keep for our return," decided Chalk. "Now, my dear, attend closely. Since you are the avowed friend of Ozma and live with her in this palace, it seems to me you are the one to keep safely the secret of the magic emeralds." Moving close to Dorothy, Chalk put his soft pink nose close to her ear and whispered several very hoarse sentences. "Get it! Get it!" he demanded, backing away exuberantly. "Oh, is that all?" Dorothy pushed back her hair in surprise and bewilderment. Why anyone could do that. "Then prove it by sending us back to Scampavia," beamed Chalk, shaking his mane approvingly. "It would be embarrassing for us to be here when Ozma and her friends return. Here, my child, take the necklaces, and I'll do the wishing." Pegasus, now more interested than frightened, tried his best to see what Dorothy did after she clasped the emeralds around her neck, and the white horse solemnly wished himself and Scamperoo back in Scampavia. But before Chalk reached 10 in his counting, there was a whiff and puff, and except for a slight rustle in the air, no sign at all of the splendid white steed and his red-faced master. "It works! It works!" exulted Bitty Bit, hopping about like a brownie.
Can you do it again, my dear?
"All we need to do is to wish that the people of Oz shall be released from this wicked spell of forgetting, and then wish Ozma and all the others safely back to this palace." "Don't forget, Highboy," cried Pegasus, switching his little tail violently. "He's gone too, you know. And don't forget Jinnicky and old Willie Green Whiskers." "I'll remember," promised Bitty Bit. "All ready, Dorothy?" The little girl nodded, and Bitty Bit, looking and feeling more serious and important than he had ever felt in his whole little life, slowly made the wish that was to restore peace and happiness to Oz. "I wish," said the little sage sternly, "that the wicked enchantment cast by Scamperoo upon the inhabitants of Oz be instantly dispelled. I wish that Ozma herself, the Wizard of Oz, the Red Jinn of Ev, the King and Queen of the Munchkins and their son Prince Philidor, the King and Queen of the Gillikins and their giant horse, Glinda the Good Sorceress of the South, Nick Chopper the Tin Emperor of the East, and the soldier with the green whiskers be immediately released from Thunder Mountain and restored to this palace." 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At 7, Pegasus, with a loud squall of astonishment, fell from the top of the cabinet, and Dorothy rushed joyfully forward. For now, every chair around the wizard's table was occupied. At the head sat Ozma, calm and gracious as ever, at the foot the spry little wizard, and between all the others who had so recently lain at the bottom of Lightning Lake. Highboy stood over by the window, looking dreamily out across the garden, and none of them seemed in the least surprised or excited to find themselves in the wizard's laboratory. "Let me see," mused Ozma, raising her hand gravely. "Ah, yes, we are here to discuss a threatened danger to ourselves and the kingdom of Oz."
"But it's all over now,"
cried Dorothy, running over to Ozma and flinging both arms round her waist. "It's all over, and we're safe, and you're safe, and my, how glad we are to have you back here again."
"Here,"
exclaimed the wizard, popping up like a startled jack-in-the-box. "Where else would we be?" "Only at the bottom of Lightning Lake and Thunder Mountain," murmured Bitty Bit, coming modestly forward to meet the fairy ruler of Oz and winking merrily at Jinnicky, whom he already knew. Chapter 19. The Story of the Necklaces. Ozma's surprise and the astonishment of all the rest of that company around the wizard's table can well be imagined. "I didn't hear any thunder," snorted Highboy, lowering himself down to Bitty Bit's level. "Not a clap, and if we were at the bottom of Lightning Lake, what did we eat?" "We didn't," announced Jinnicky in a hollow voice. "What could we have eaten in such a place, you old fire-eater, you?" To have been enchanted and put out of existence for 3 whole days was an amazing experience, and as Dorothy and Bitty Bit, helped out now and then by Pegasus, explained all that had happened to the victims of Scamperoo's ambition, and to themselves in the course of their journey of rescue, Ozma's face grew both grave and serious. It was disturbing to realize how easily Oz had been captured and the powerful wizards and Glinda the sorceress pushed aside. The Wizard of Oz himself seemed to feel the most discouraged and downcast of all, to think he had been so easily overcome, and that his magic had not been strong enough to withstand the wicked spell of the invaders. "I should have foreseen something like this and been prepared," mourned the little man, mopping his head with a map of Oz which he happened to have in his pocket. "Yes," sighed the Tin Woodman, feeling his joints anxiously to see whether they had been rusted by his 3-day immersion in Lightning Lake. "We might have been prisoners in Thunder Mountain forever had it not been for Dorothy and Pegasus and this sagacious little seer. But tell me, Dorothy, how was it that you alone, of all the people in the palace, remembered and missed us?" "Well," confessed Dorothy, seating herself cautiously on Nick Chopper's tin knees, "it must have been the wizard's wishing pill. You see, just as the soldier's beard turned red, I found one in my pocket, and popping it into my mouth, wished that I might save Oz from any danger that threatened. It kept me from forgetting Ozma and all of you, and when I sat on Pegasus's back, he remembered too, and we—" "Did save Oz!" finished the little wizard, bounding triumphantly to his feet and restored to instant cheerfulness by Dorothy's generous statement. "I tell you, I'll match my wishing powers with any wishing powers in the country." "But you won't have to now," smiled Bitty Bit with an envious glance at the sparkling necklaces Dorothy had placed on the table before Ozma. "With these emeralds and your own magic powers, nothing like this could ever happen in Oz again." "Thank you, Bitty Bit," smiled the little queen, nodding graciously. "Thank you 100 times for all you have done for us and for Oz, and perhaps if we coaxed you might remain as our royal seer." "Here, here, our royal seer!" cried Pegasus, clapping his wings. "Will you be it, Sir Bitty Bit?" "Well," acknowledged Bitty Bit, with a low bow toward Ozma, "I am tempted to accept, but, on the other hand, I am so foolishly fond of my own castle, I just could not be content in any other place. But if your Majesty ever needs me for serious business, you can always command my services by using either the wishing necklaces or your magic belt." "And he'll come like a shot in his shooting tower," Dorothy smiled as she slid carefully from Nick Chopper's knee. "But say, what's that?" 100 footsteps sounded in the corridor, accompanied by confused voices, questioning calls, and finally loud thumps on the door. "It must be all the rest of the courtiers and visitors remembering they have a queen." "I hear Scraps and the Scarecrow," squealed Pegasus. "I hear Betsy Bobbin and Trot." "Quick, Dorothy, open the door." "No, no, not yet," said Ozma gently but firmly. "There is more, much more for us to hear and settle. But you go out, Pegasus, and tell them all about our enchantment, Scamperoo's reign, and our rescue. Be glad to, charmed, and trust me to do it right." Swelling up with importance and pride, Pegasus flew out the window before Dorothy had time to open the door. A few moments later, the company in the Wizard's laboratory heard him calling everyone to follow him to the throne room and hear the most startling news since Dorothy killed the wicked witches of the East and West. "And how he'll love telling it," said Bitty Bit, smiling across at the Wizard of Ev. "A great idea of yours, this pig, Ginny. Even if his verses are low, I like him." "Oh, everyone likes Pegasus," declared Dorothy, coming over to sit on the arm of Glinda's chair. "But what I'd like to know is how that kitchen boy happened to have the emeralds, how Scamperoo got them, and where they came from in the first place." "Yes," murmured Glinda, who, like the wizard, felt very much annoyed to have been overpowered by a fat, unimportant monarch like Scamperoo. Now that we have these wishing chains, we must guard them carefully to keep them from falling into such mischievous hands again." "I believe Bitty Bit can tell us the story of the emeralds," said Ozma, who had been much impressed by the cheerful little seer of some summit. "With his gift of foreseeing and foretelling, he probably knows the whole story." "Can he look backward as well as forward?" inquired the wizard challengingly. "Just as well," confessed Bitty Bit with an embarrassed little cough, and as every head turned expectantly toward him, the sage closed his eyes and quietly told them the interesting history of Matiah's 3 necklaces. "These magic emeralds," began Bitty Bit, waving his hands rhythmically backward and forward, "were first collected and strung into necklaces by a wizard named Wham for the king of the Green Mountain as a gift for the wood nymph, Lorna. But the king of the Green Mountain was an ugly little dwarf, and though she had promised to marry him, no sooner did Lorna have the necklaces than she turned the king into a frog and hid herself away in her own forest. In the giant hollow tree where Lorna lived, there was a mischievous family of squirrels. That night, as Lorna lay sleeping with the emeralds on a little golden plate beside her, one of the squirrels, thinking the gems some new and delicious kind of nuts, stole and buried them away for the winter. Next morning, though Lorna ran crying and searching all through the forest, she was unable to find her wishing necklaces. "Then what became of them?" gasped Dorothy as Bitty Bit, opening his eyes for a moment, blinked cheerfully over their heads. "Wait, I'll tell you." Closing his eyes, the sage went hurriedly on with the story. "Ah, so this is it. A woodcutter's boy, poking about among the leaves, found the emeralds, and as emeralds in themselves are not uncommon in Oz, he traded them to a peddler for a new axe. The peddler, arriving after a long while in Scampavia, had no trouble in disposing of the jewels. In Scampavia, you must know, emeralds, pearls, or jewels of any kind are practically unknown, and a merchant gave the peddler not only his house and shop, but all of his merchandise for the 3 sparkling chains. By a law in Scampavia, every subject must render to the king 1/3 of all he owns or raises, and in due course one of the necklaces was sent to Scamperoo. The king, delighted with the sparkling gems, insisted on having all 3 necklaces, and Matiah himself brought them to the castle, determined, if possible, to steal them back at the first opportunity. In order to do so without arousing the suspicions of the king, he pretends to be a wizard and tells him if he, Matiah, wears the 3 necklaces, he can grant any wish the king may make, but that as he makes the wish, he must close his eyes and count to 100. As soon as Scamperoo began to count, Matiah started to run off with the emeralds, and that accounts for the white horse. For you see, Scamperoo's first wish was for a splendid white charger with a golden mane and tail. Frightened almost out of his senses by the sudden appearance of the horse and the knowledge that the chains really did have some magic power, Matiah steals back beside the king, resolved to wait for another opportunity to procure the necklaces. Meanwhile, Scamperoo, excited and happy over the granting of his first wish, confides in the merchant his second wish and ambition to be ruler of Oz. Matiah, to gain time in which he can work out the secret of the emerald's power, approves of the king's idea, but tells him he can only grant 1 wish a week. He then advises Scamperoo to cause all the people in Oz to forget their former rulers, and to remove the wizard and all his magic, Ozma, and the rulers of the 4 Oz countries to the inaccessible caverns of Thunder Mountain. Now while Matiah is trying his best to discover the trick of the magic emeralds, Scamperoo, growing tired of the temporary fellow, appealed to his horse. The horse, being magically brought to life and being unusually sharp-witted and quick, soon worked out the problem. With his help, Scamperoo wished the spell of forgetting upon Ozma's subjects, banished Her Highness and all of the others just as Matiah had suggested, and managed to rule Oz for 3 whole days. "But what became of Matiah?" asked Glinda, leaning forward eagerly. At this moment, Mattia is lying in a senseless condition in the underground chamber beneath this castle, Bitty-Bit told them solemnly, and without opening his eyes. Soon after Scamperoo left for Oz, the merchant was driven out of Scampavia by Penny, whom Scamperoo had made king. Mattia, furious to think the apparently stupid sovereign had outwitted him, bribed an eagle to carry him across the desert, arrived at the Emerald City, and soon afterward managed to really steal the necklaces from Scamperoo. Discovering beneath the cellar the excavated chambers of the old gnome king, he retired to this quiet spot to again experiment with the emeralds. Needing another person to help, he seized the kitchen boy who had come to the cellar for supplies and forced him to assist in his experiments. How soon he might have discovered the real trick of the chains, I cannot say, but our own arrival and Gloma's powder of darkness happily interrupted him. The kitchen boy, who had kept his eyes glued to the stone steps and trapdoor during the entire morning, made an immediate dash for freedom and managed to escape in spite of the darkness. Mattia, not so fortunate, rushed into a stone pillar and knocked himself senseless. He's still lying there, and I suggest that your majesty deal with him at once. I will, decided Ozma firmly, as Bitty-Bit opened his eyes and looked cheerfully around the table. And I'll do it by means of these very magic emeralds. Put on the emeralds, Dorothy, for you alone know the secret of their magic power. So Dorothy, anxious to have Mattia out of Oz before he recovered his wicked wits, hastily clasped the 3 chains around her slim throat. It is my earnest wish that Mattia shall immediately and henceforth forget the emerald necklaces of Oz, return to his country, and become a good and simple citizen of Scampavia, said Ozma seriously, beginning her count to 100.
He's gone! He's gone!
Piped up Bitty-Bit, who had closed his eyes as soon as Ozma started to speak. And if I were you, my dear, I would send off that red eagle too. I see him lurking on the edge of our city with an exceedingly fierce light in his eye. So Ozma made another wish, turning the eagle to a harmless sparrow. And what about Scamperoo? Asked Cheeriobed, king of the Munchkins, who up to this time had not spoken a word. Should he not be punished in some way? I would not bother with old Scamper, advised Bitty-Bit with a small chuckle. Before I agreed to give his white horse those 5 wishes, I closed my eyes, looked ahead, and discovered that they would all be good wishes. Not only good, but wise, and from now on I think you can trust that clever white horse and a little fellow called Penny to keep their master out of mischief and Oz. Well, in that case, sighed Ozma, rather breathless from so much counting, everything is happily settled. And in that case, boomed Joe King, gallantly helping his little queen to her feet, I suggest we start celebrating all over again, not only the discovery of Oz by mortals, but the saving of Oz as well. I, for one, feel terribly cheated at missing Notta's circus. So do I, exclaimed little Prince Philidor, climbing boisterously into Highboy's saddle. I want to see a circus. And so you shall, promised Ozma gaily. We will start the celebration at exactly the point where we left Oz for Thunder Mountain, and have the tableau, the pageants, and the picnics all over again. And that, my dear, is exactly what they did do, and everyone, including Bitty-Bit, enjoyed himself so much there was not an unhappy person in the Emerald City. And not until the end of the 2nd day did Dorothy remember to tell Ozma the magic secret of the wishing emeralds. On the 6th count you wink both eyes, whispered Dorothy, giving Ozma a little hug. Good night? Good gracious, so that's it, smiled Ozma, comprehending instantly what Dorothy meant. I suppose Mattia did it in sheer excitement, the of an eye, but now we shall really be able to have them that way. No one knows this secret but you and me and a white horse, and no one must ever know it, for wishes are dangerous and cause more unhappiness than joy, so we'll never tell another soul, will we, Dorothy?" "Never," agreed the little girl, looking solemnly over her shoulder at the safe where Ozma had hidden her new treasure. Chapter 20. Back in Scampavia. "So there you are, Penny." Penny straightened up with a little grimace, for he had been planting flowers in a new rock garden he was planning for the king. With an expression about equally compounded of exasperation and affection, he looked at his former master and the white horse who had, without sound or warning, dropped down in the path before him. "I thought you'd come back," continued Penny, calmly rubbing the mud from his fingers and putting out his hand. "So it was your horse, after all." His gaze rested speculatively on the splendid white steed and richly jeweled robes of Scamperoo. "And you've made your fortune, I see." "Well, welcome home anyway. Your crown's hanging on a nail back of the throne, and I think you will find everything in order." "In order? Why, it looks wonderful!" shouted Scamperoo, leaping exuberantly out of the saddle, and honestly surprised and pleased at the pleasure he felt in seeing old Penny again. "You've had the palace painted, and this garden, and that fountain, and the flowers. They're all new, aren't they?" "Yes," agreed Penny guardedly. "I made a few new laws while you were gone, Scamper, making the tax only 1/20th of our subjects' earnings." They were so grateful and delighted, they've been sending you presents ever since. Then the guards, having no drill or marching to bother them, I did away with that, too. The guards in their odd time agreed to work around the castle, and we've been brightening up the old place quite a bit. "I tell you, Penny exhaled his breath noisily, "we'll make a going and coming country of this yet." "Of course we will," said Scamperoo, bouncing happily along at his side. "I've had a lot of experience since I saw you, old Skinny Pins. Ho, Penny, my boy, I've been an emperor in Oz. Oh, Zay, never." Closing his lips into a thin line, Penny looked from his master to Chalk, who was stepping sedately along on his other side. "But it's perfectly true," whinnied the white horse, prancing a bit from sheer enjoyment. "And now we're home with 5 splendid wishes." "Wishes?" sniffed Penny, rearing his head suspiciously. "What good are wishes?" "But these wishes really work and come true," explained Chalk with a toss of his head. "And what's more, they are going to work and come true for Scampavia." "Any wish you work hard enough for will come true," insisted Penny stubbornly.
"Wishes, P.O., wishes, P.O."
"If wishes were horses, beggars would ride," finished the little Prime Minister half under his breath. "But don't you see?" Scamperoo grasped Penny firmly by the shoulders. "This is one time when wishes were horses and beggars did ride. My first wish was for a horse, and here he is, and as true as you are, and as wise and clever. Why, even if the magic emeralds give me nothing more, I am still the luckiest fellow on this side of the deadly desert. Moons, stars, and rainbows." "I believe you have gotten some sense," gasped Penny, staring with wide eyes into Scamperoo's face. "And that's the first good I ever knew to come of magic." Pulling Penny down to his old bench, now neatly mended and painted green, the King of Scampavia told his little Prime Minister the whole story, one have just been telling you. When he finished and settled back complacently, Penny, instead of looking glad or pleased, stared mournfully at the ground. "Now what's the matter?" demanded Scamperoo, clapping him impatiently on the back, while Chalk, breaking off a little branch with his teeth, tickled Penny mischievously under the chin. "Why are you so sad and solemn?" "Because," Penny ground the toe of his boot deeply into the gravel in the path, "if you really have 5 more magic wishes, you'll probably be going to some grand other place and be spending the rest of your life in travel." "If that were so, we wouldn't be here at all," puffed Scamperoo. "Now get this through your head, old fellow. We are here by our own wish, and from now on my own country is good enough for me, and when we've made these 5 good wishes, good enough for anybody." There you go, groaned Pinny Penny, covering his face with his hands. It's the wishes I'm afraid of. Well, you needn't be. With a great effort, Scamperoo made his first really great and wise decision. You shall make the wishes yourself, Pinny Penny, and I shall save only one in case of trouble. Bravo, bravo! Snorted Chalk, prancing 3 times round the green bench. Me? You really mean me? Quavered Pinny Penny, pointing an unbelieving finger at his own midsection. Then, as Scamperoo nodded, and before he could change his mind, the old Chancellor fairly leapt into the air. I wish the king of this country to always be as wise and generous as he has succeeded in being at this moment, as wise as the young fairy ruler of Oz, panted Pinny Penny. I wish that the people of Scampavia, using the powers and abilities they already have, shall make this a rich, happy, and prosperous kingdom. I wish that the climate and soil, the only bad features about which we might complain, shall become mild and fertile. That's all. That's all I can think of, confessed Pinny Penny, shrinking happily back on the bench. Then I'll make a wish, whinnied Chalk, shaking his beautiful golden mane. I wish that we 3 may never be separated. Long live the king and his prime minister. And his horse, cried Scamperoo, bounding up to seize Chalk's bridle. And his horse, echoed Pinny Penny heartily, running round to seize Chalk's bridle on the other side. We 3 for Scampavia forever. Then, with Chalk stepping proudly in the center, these 3 strangely assorted comrades made their way into the palace. Knowing the power of the magic emeralds and also the magic power of knowledge and experience, I am sure that Scampavia under its new regime will soon be as happy and prosperous as any nation in Oz.